Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist and today I'm going to be doing a Swordsoul deck profile. So I'm really excited for you guys because this deck is an extremely powerful, extremely consistent tier 1 deck that is just really fun to play. Because you can summon out all sorts of extremely powerful synchro monsters to your side of the field to help you go in for games. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell in there so you can become part of notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like in your name description in a single video, getting a signed card sent in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month your patron, along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Swordsoul Moe. This card is a great 3-up for the deck, and the hands down best normal summon in the entire build. Now, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can reveal a Swordsoul card or a worm monster in your hand, and then special summon out a Swordsoul token that's a worm, tuner, water, level 4, 0 attack, and 0 defense, which is an extremely powerful effect because it gives you the materials to actually synchro summon into a level 8 synchro monster, which is a really awesome thing because the tuner is actually the token to be able to synchro summon, which is really cool. It also has the ability that while that token is in the monster zone, the player who summoned it cannot special summon monsters from the X deck except for synchro monsters, which is not that big of a deal because when you're summoning out cards like Moe, you're pretty much going directly into a synchro play. It also has the ability, if this card is sent to the graveyard as a synchro material, then you can draw a card, which helps you go in for additional plays. We then play 3 copies of Swordsoul Strategist Long Yun. Long Yun is a really good 3-of in the deck because it has the ability to discard either a Swordsoul or a worm monster to special summon this card from your hand, and then you get to special summon out a Swordsoul token just like your copy of Moe, and it does lock you into synchro monsters from the X deck while the token is on the field, which is not that big of a deal because it pretty much sets you up for a level 10 synchro play, which is really awesome. And if this card is used as synchro material, it does 1200 points of damage to your opponent, which is really good to help you close out games. We then play 2 copies of Swordsoul Taie. Taie is really good in the deck as a 2-up. I consider playing 1 in my build, but with Pot of Desires back at 2 now, I don't want to banish my single copy of Taie off Desires, so I played 2 copies of it because I do want to see it every so often. It has the ability you can banish a Swordsoul card or a worm monster from your graveyard to special summon out a Swordsoul token to your side of the field, and it also has the ability, if this card is sent to the graveyard as a synchro material, then you can send a Swordsoul or a worm monster from your deck to the graveyard, which is a really good effect just to get cards like your Tinny monsters to the graveyard. We then play 3 copies of Ecclesia. Ecclesia is a really good card in the deck because if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can special summon this card from your hand, and you can only special summon this card once per turn this way. But this card comes in very handy to be able to put on your side of the field as a level 4 tuner. We then play 3 copies of the Tinny Spirit Ashuna. Ashuna is a really good 3-up for your Tinnies because it has the ability, just like all of your other Tinny monsters, that if you control no effect monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you control a face-up non-effect monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard to get a unique effect. Well, this card's unique effect is that you can special summon out a Tinny monster from your deck except another copy of this card, but it does lock you into special summoning worm monsters for the rest of the turn. So this is something you got to watch out for as you're going into your combos because it'll lock you out of cards like your copies of your Baron de Fleur and other tech cards that we're playing in the X deck that are not worm monsters. We're then playing 3 copies of the Tinny Spirit Vishuda. Vishuda is a really good 3-of because it's a bounce with the ability that you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard and then target a card your opponent controls and return it to the hand, which is a really great effect. We're then playing 3 copies of the Tinny Spirit Adahara. Adahara is a really good card to recover some of your worm monsters back to your hand because this card is the ability that you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard and then target one of your banished worm monsters except this card and add it back to your hand, which is a really good effect to be able to get cards back off your copies of Taie's effect or any of your Tinny monsters after they banish them except for Adahara, which is a really good effect. We then play a single copy of the Water Tinny. The Water Tinny is a good card to actually surprise the opponent because it has the ability that basically if a face-up non-effect monster you control is destroyed by battle of that card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, from your hand or graveyard, and then target one of those destroyed monsters and special summon it back to your field, and then you get to destroy a monster that your opponent controls, which is a pretty good effect to be able to get rid of a card that your opponent controls, while also bringing back something like your Monk of the Tinny back to your side of the field. We then play 3 copies of Ashwell. Blossom, which pretty much just stops the opponent from touching the deck, which is a really good effect while you're going in for your plays. And then we play 3 copies of Effect Veiler just to stop your opponent's monster effects, which it does come up every so often, depending on your hand, that it's actually a tuner and it's a level 1, so it can help you go in for some plays in the deck. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of the Swordsoul Sacred Summit, which is the N-Archetype Monster Reborn that lets you target a Swordsoul monster in your graveyard, or if you control a Synchro monster, you can target a Worm monster instead and special summon it back to your side of the field, which is a really good effect just to help you go in for additional plays. We then play a single copy of Called by the Grave, so we can basically avoid getting hand trapped while we're going in for all sorts of really amazing Synchro monsters. We then play 2 copies of Pot of Desires. Pot of Desires is really, really good in the deck, and I think this deck is actually the reason that Pot of Desires actually went to 1 on the last list, but now it's back at 2, so this deck is really powerful now. Basically, you banish 10 from the top of your deck, and then you draw 2 cards, which is absolutely insane because it actually works with one of our cards in the extra deck to boost its attack up, which is really, really nice. We then play 3 copies of Vessel of the Dragon Circle. This card is really, really good in the deck to be able to put in because it has the ability to send a worm monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then if you control a face-up non-effect monster, you can also add from your deck to your hand a Tenyi monster with a different name from the monster sent to the graveyard, which is a really great effect because this card is basically a Foolish Burial and a search card all in one, which is really nice. And speaking of search cards, we're also playing 3 copies of Swordsoul Emergence, which is basically the Rhoda for your Sword Souls, but also for your Worm monsters with the ability that you can add a Swordsoul monster from your deck to your hand, or if you control a Synchro monster, you can add a Worm monster instead, which is really, really good. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're going to be playing a single copy of Swordsoul Blackout. Swordsoul Blackout is a great one in the deck because it lets you target a worm monster that you control and 2 cards your opponent controls and you destroy them. This card combos off really, really well with our Supreme Sovereign, which you guys will see in the extra deck. This card is really, really good because it's basically an Icarus attack that's actually searchable in the deck, but since we're playing Desires, I did consider playing this card as a 2-of in this build, but the deck is already so tight that I ended up cutting it down to 1. We're then playing 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Infinite Impermanence is a really, really good card in this deck. Playing alongside your copies of Effect Veiler and your copies of Ash Blossom brings our total of hand traps up to 9, which I think is totally fine in this build. But Infinite Impermanence is really good because it can stop your opponent's monster effects and also stop monster effects stop spells and traps effects in the same column as it, which is really, really good. Now you can change out the copies of Effect Veiler for DD Crow or the copies of Infinite Impermanence for Ghost Ogre if you want to, but basically these 9 hand traps are just positions for depending on what your matchups are for what you can play for your hand trap slot. So you can interchange them out as needed. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 2 copies of the Swordsoul Grandmaster. This card is really, really good because it's basically an Effect Veiler and a search card all in one, which is really good. Because if this card is Synchro Summon, you can add it to your hand. You can add to your hand or banish a Swordsoul card from your deck, which is really good because you can add all sorts of different combo pieces from your deck to your hand. Also has the ability that quick effect, you can banish a Swordsoul card or a Worm monster from your hand or graveyard and then target one other effect monster on the field and negate its effects into the end phase of this turn, which is really good that this card is basically a Rhoda and a walking negate. We then play a single copy of the Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign. This card is the card that I was talking about with Blackout that it combos really, really well because it has the ability that for each card, or for each banished card, this card gains 100 attack and defense, and monsters that your opponent controls lose 100 attack and defense, which combos really well with Desire's effect to be able to banish 10. So you're basically going to boost this card up to 4,000 attack points while dropping your opponent's monsters down by 1,000 attack points. And this card also has the ability, if this card would be destroyed by card effects, then you can banish a card from your graveyard instead, which will combo with your copy of Blackout to be able to protect this card from the copy of Blackout and then pop 2 cards in your opponent's field, while also getting the ability that if a card is banished, then you can also banish a card from your opponent's field and graveyard, which turns your copy of Swordsoul Blackout into a banished one from field, graveyard, and pop 2 on the field, which is really, really insane. We then play a single copy of the Sinister Sovereign. This card does a lot of burn damage and just gets cards off the field, because if it's synchro summon, or if you synchro summon another worm monster while this monster is on the field, then you can draw a card. And if your opponent special summons a monster except during the damage step, you can banish one of those monsters, and if you do, inflict 1200 points of damage to your opponent. And which is just a really good effect to be able to get a card off the field and do 1200 burn damage. It also has the ability that when your opponent activates a spell or trap card, then quick effect, you can banish that card, and if you do, inflict 1200 points of damage to your opponent. Now, the really neat thing is you're usually going into this card with your copy of the Strategist, the level 6 Swordsoul monster, which is going to do 1200 points of damage when it's used as synchro material to summon out this card. And then this card right here is going to do an additional 2400, which is going to be a total of 3600 that you're going to do against the opponent off of those 2 cards, which is just really, really good in this deck to be able to basically get rid of almost half of your opponent's life points off of 2 cards, which is really good. We then play a single copy of the Berserker of the Tinyi. Berserker of Tinyi is really good because when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can banish that card, which is a really good effect just to be able to banish cards off your opponent's field or out of their hand when they activate monster effects. And if this card destroys a monster by battle that's an effect monster, it gains attack equal to that monster's attack on the field, which is really, really good. And then it can make a second attack on another monster, which is just a really awesome effect. We then play a single copy of Dragite because it can negate spells and trap cards. So this card is a really good one-of in the deck because Moe is a water monster, and we also have our cards like our Water Tinyi Spirit that if it's in the graveyard, this card also gains that ability to be able to stop spells and traps effects. We then play a single copy of Yazi because it's just a really good combo piece in the deck. And then 2 copies of Baxia. Baxia is absolutely insane in the deck because it helps you go into your copy of Chaofeng with the ability that when this card is synchro summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of different original attributes of worm type monsters used for the synchro summon of this card and shuffle them into the deck, which gets rid of cards off the field, but it also has the ability that once per turn, you can target one card you control and a level 4 or lower monster in your graveyard and destroy that card on the field. And if you do, you can special summon that monster back to your side of the field, like a copy of your Adahara, which then will let you synchro summon into your copy of Chaofeng using that copy of Adahara and your copy of Baxia, which is really cool. And it's really awesome because your copy of your Chaofeng will then be able to stop your opponent's monsters that have light attribute, which is really, really good. We then play a single copy of Baron de Fleur. Baron de Fleur is just a really good card in this deck to be able to pop cards on the field and be a walking gate. And then my personal tech of the deck is a single copy of Psychic End Punisher. Psychic End Punisher is really good in a lot of different matchups because you can go from losing the duel with this card to be instantly winning with the ability that while your life points are less than or equal to your opponent's, this synchro summon card is unaffected by your opponent's activated effects, and then once per turn, you can pay 1000 life points and then target a monster that you control and a card your opponent controls and banish them. And at the start of the battle phase, you can make this card gain attack equal difference between your life points and your opponent's life points, which is really cool because this card can get absolutely massive to help you close out a game. We then play a single copy of the Shaman of the Tinyi because this card has the ability to banish a card and then target a worm monster in the grave and special summon it, but for the rest of the turn, you can't activate the effects of monsters special summon the extra deck except for Tinyi monsters, which is a little bit of a downside, but you can get a monster back on your side of the field. We then play 2 copies of Monk of the Tinyi. I'm playing just 2 copies of this card, not 3, because I feel like 2 is totally fine. If you need the 3rd one, something has gone probably wrong, but I really like 2 copies in the deck because usually by the time I summon the 2nd one, I'm closing out the game. So this card is really, really good in the deck because you can get your Tinyi monsters into the graveyard and give you a non-effect monster to be able to use their effects. So it's pretty much a really good combo piece to get those cards into the graveyard so you can start resolving those monsters' effects. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to be able to play. I really love playing around with Swordsoul because it's just such a cool deck to be able to play with because it's just so good to be able to summon out all those different synchro monsters because synchro summoning is actually my favorite mechanic in the entire game. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell in there so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.